The afternoon sun dripped like honey through the towering windows of the Copper Kettle, a downtown cafe whispered about in every magazine that mattered, a place where exposed brick met polished copper in a dance of modern charm and ageless warmth. Ethan Reynolds, a silhouette against the sunlit room, checked his phone, a nervous habit played out a dozen times in as many minutes. He was 39, a landmark age, and possessed all the trophies of a successful man. A corner office that pierced the city skyline, a portfolio fat with millions, a reputation that echoed in the halls of commercial real estate. Yet, the echo bounced back unanswered, for there was no one to share the view from the top. Rachel, his ever-observant assistant, had orchestrated this blind date, a subtle intervention after witnessing yet another weekend swallowed whole by work. She had shrouded the details in mystery, hinting only at beauty, accomplishment, and a compatibility that resonated with his deepest needs. Ethan suspected a setup, one involving a model friend of Rachel's, the type of woman who graced his arm at charity galas, a shimmering accessory destined to fade when she realized his true devotion lay elsewhere, in spreadsheets and contracts. He smoothed the lines of his charcoal suit, sipped his espresso, the bitter taste mirroring his expectations, bracing himself for another evening of curated conversation, a forced march through the landscape of Fashion Week and Instagram followers. He was already mapping his escape when the cafe door swung open, a chime announcing a disruption to his carefully laid plans. The woman who entered was an anomaly, a glitch in the matrix of his expectations. She was undeniably lovely, a gentle bloom in the urban landscape. Perhaps 27 or 28, her features soft, her light brown hair gathered in a simple style that spoke of practicality rather than pretense. She wore a powder blue dress, a color that suggested Sunday brunch rather than a first date, and cradled a 2-year-old daughter on her hip, the weight of motherhood resting easily on her slender frame. The little girl, a miniature masterpiece in a pink floral dress, boasted auburn curls that caught the light, transforming into shimmering copper pennies. The woman's eyes, wide with a delicate nervousness, scanned the cafe, searching for a familiar face in the crowd. When her gaze landed on Ethan, a flicker of recognition sparked, followed by a hesitant glance at her phone, and then back at him, her expression a delicate tapestry woven with hope and apprehension in equal measure. Ethan felt a cold stone drop into the pit of his stomach, a moment of clarity that shattered his carefully constructed illusions. This could not be his date. Rachel, with her meticulous planning and keen understanding of his life, would never have engineered a meeting with a single mother. She knew his schedule, his relentless ambition, his carefully guarded world that had no room for complications, for playdates and pediatrician appointments, for the demands of a life lived beyond the confines of his professional kingdom. But the woman, propelled by an unseen force, stopped at his table, shifting the toddler to her other hip, a silent negotiation for balance and composure. "Ethan Reynolds?" she asked, her voice a soft, uncertain melody that barely cut through the cafe's gentle hum. "Yes," Ethan managed, the word a fragile thing, barely audible, as he clung to the fading hope that this was all a misunderstanding, a cruel twist of fate. "I'm Sophie Mitchell," she said, and Ethan detected a tremor in her voice, a subtle vibration that spoke volumes about her anxieties. "Rachel set us up. I'm so sorry. I know this isn't what you expected." The words tumbled out, a cascade of apologies and explanations, each one hammering another nail into the coffin of Ethan's carefully crafted exit strategy. The little girl, nestled in Sophie's arm, stared at him with wide hazel eyes, her thumb tucked securely in her mouth, a silent observer in this unfolding drama. "This is my daughter, Lily," Sophie continued, her voice softening as she gently bounced the child, a subconscious rhythm of reassurance. "I completely understand if you want to reschedule, or if this is just too awkward. I can leave right now." Ethan opened his mouth, the rehearsed agreement poised on his tongue, the polite suggestion of rescheduling for a future date, a date he knew he would inevitably cancel, erasing her from his schedule as easily as deleting an unwanted email. But before he could utter the carefully chosen words, the little girl, Lily, reached out a pudgy hand toward him, her fingers unfurling like petals, and smiled, revealing tiny white teeth, a fleeting glimpse of pure, unadulterated joy. "Hi." Lily said, her voice a sweet, trusting whisper, muffled slightly by her thumb, a greeting that bypassed his defenses and resonated with something deep within his soul. Ethan found himself smiling back, an involuntary response that surprised him with its warmth. "Hello, Lily," he heard himself say, the words tumbling out with unexpected ease, as he instinctively pulled out the chair across from him, an invitation that defied his carefully laid plans. "Please sit down, at least for a few minutes." Relief washed over Sophie's face, a visible release of tension that softened her features. She settled into the chair, adjusting Lily on her lap, her movements careful, considerate. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice tinged with gratitude. "I know this is completely inappropriate for a first date. You probably think I'm a disaster." "I think you're honest," Ethan said, the words surprising even him with their unbidden truth. "You could have pretended your daughter was your niece, or made up some elaborate excuse. Instead, you told me exactly what happened." Sophie smiled, and it transformed her entire face, a subtle shift that illuminated her beauty from within. "I'm terrible at lying," she admitted, a hint of self-deprecation in her tone. "My face always gives me away. Besides, Lily is the most important part of my life. Anyone who wants to know me needs to know that from the start." A server appeared, summoned by an unspoken agreement, and Sophie ordered hot chocolate for herself, her voice tinged with apology as she added, "I can't afford anything more expensive." The admission, spoken without shame or self-pity, should have embarrassed her, but she delivered it with simple dignity, as if poverty were just another fact of life, a hurdle to be acknowledged rather than a burden to be hidden. Ethan ordered a coffee he did not want, a prop to justify their continued presence, a silent offering of solidarity. "So," Sophie said, breaking the silence, pulling a small container of crackers from her bag and handing them to Lily, a practical gesture of motherhood. "Rachel tells me you're very successful. She talks about you like you walk on water." Ethan felt his guard go up, a defensive reflex honed over years of navigating the treacherous waters of the corporate world. "Rachel is biased," he said, his voice cool, detached. "I'm just someone who works too much and has forgotten how to do much else." "That sounds lonely," Sophie said, and there was such genuine compassion in her eyes, a gentle empathy that bypassed his carefully constructed defenses, that Ethan felt something crack inside his carefully constructed walls. "It is," he admitted, the words escaping before he could censor them, a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. "I built a company from nothing, proved everyone wrong who said I would fail, and ended up with an empire, but an empty apartment to come home to." Sophie nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering, her understanding palpable. "I understand loneliness," she said softly. "Mine comes from different circumstances, but I understand it." "What happened?" Ethan asked, the question propelled by a genuine curiosity that surprised him with its intensity. Sophie glanced down at Lily, who was contentedly munching crackers, her attention absorbed by the kaleidoscope of activity swirling around her. "Lily's father left when I was 6 months pregnant," she said, her voice devoid of bitterness, a simple statement of fact. "He said he wasn't ready to be a father, that I should have been more careful, that he had dreams that didn't include changing diapers." She said it without accusation, just a quiet sadness that resonated with Ethan's own unspoken regrets. "I worked at a bookstore until Lily was born," she continued, painting a portrait of her life in broad strokes. "Then I stayed home with her for the first year, cherishing every moment. Now I work part-time at a library and babysit in the evenings to make ends meet. It's not glamorous, but we have each other, and we're happy." Ethan watched as Lily offered her mother a cracker, a gesture of innocent generosity, and Sophie pretended to eat it with exaggerated delight, eliciting a giggle from her daughter, a sound as pure and bright as sunshine. The love between them was so tangible, so palpable, it seemed to fill the air around their table, a warm, invisible embrace. "Rachel works at the library on Saturday mornings," Sophie continued, her voice bringing him back to the present. "She volunteers reading to children. We became friends, and when she heard I hadn't been on a date since Lily was born, she insisted on setting this up. I told her nobody would want to date a single mom with no money and a toddler. But she said you were different, that you were lonely too, and maybe we could understand each other." Ethan paused, considering the implications of her words, the subtle matchmaking of his assistant. "I'm beginning to think Rachel is smarter than I give her credit for," he said quietly, a hint of amusement in his tone. Sophie looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. "You're not running for the exit?" she asked, her voice laced with cautious hope. "I was planning to," Ethan admitted, his honesty disarming. "When you walked in with Lily, I was already composing my excuse, mentally drafting the email I would send to Rachel, the carefully worded explanation. But then your daughter smiled at me, and you were so honest about everything, and I realized I've spent 10 years surrounding myself with people who want something from me. You're the first person in longer than I can remember who seems content just being herself." Their drinks arrived, breaking the intensity of the moment. Lily reached for Sophie's hot chocolate with grabby hands, her curiosity overwhelming her inhibitions. Sophie gently redirected her to a sippy cup of water she pulled from her bag, wiping chocolate from the rim of her own cup with a napkin before taking a sip, a practiced maneuver executed with grace and efficiency. "Tell me about your work," Sophie said, her gaze focused on him, her interest genuine. "What do you do when you're building empires?" Ethan found himself talking about his company, but not in the boastful, self-aggrandizing way he did at networking events. He talked about the challenge of it, the intellectual stimulation, the satisfaction of turning abandoned buildings into thriving communities, the quiet pride of giving people jobs and opportunities, of contributing to the city he called home. Sophie listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that showed she was really hearing him, not just waiting for her turn to speak. In turn, he asked about her life, and Sophie painted a picture of simple joys and daily struggles, a life lived on a smaller scale, but no less rich in meaning. She talked about story time at the library, about the elderly regulars who came in just for conversation, about Lily's fascination with books, even though she could not yet read the words on the page. She described their tiny apartment with such warmth and affection that it sounded more appealing than his luxury penthouse, a space filled with love rather than emptiness. Lily grew restless, her attention span waning, and Sophie pulled crayons and paper from her bag, spreading them on the table, transforming the sterile surface into a canvas for creativity. The little girl set to work creating colorful scribbles, narrating her artwork in a stream of toddler babble that made no sense, but somehow needed no translation, a universal language of imagination. "Sorry," Sophie said, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she wiped a crayon mark off the table, a futile attempt to contain the artistic chaos. "She's an artist. Don't apologize," Ethan said, watching Lily work with intense concentration, her brow furrowed in concentration. "When was the last time you did something just for the joy of it, without worrying about the outcome, without calculating the return on investment?" Sophie tilted her head, considering his question, her mind searching for a recent example. "Yesterday, actually," she said, a smile playing on her lips. "We had a dance party in our living room, just me and Lily spinning around to silly songs until we were both dizzy and laughing." Ethan could not remember the last time he had laughed until he was dizzy, the last time he had surrendered to pure, unadulterated joy. He could not remember the last time he had done anything without calculating its value, its return on investment, its strategic importance. "That sounds perfect," he said quietly, his voice tinged with wistful admiration. "It was," Sophie agreed, smoothing Lily's curls with a gentle hand, a gesture of unconditional love. "These are the moments I'll remember when I'm old, not the struggles, not the money worries, but the dancing and the laughter, and the way she looks at me like I hung the moon." They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic, a connection forming that transcended their disparate backgrounds and lifestyles. Ethan found himself laughing at Sophie's stories about library patrons and their peculiar requests, their eccentricities endearing rather than irritating. Sophie listened with rapt attention to his description of his latest building project, asking questions that showed she understood the vision behind the blueprints, the desire to create something lasting and meaningful. Lily, her artistic endeavors temporarily abandoned, eventually climbed down from Sophie's lap and approached Ethan's side of the table, offering him a drawing of what might have been a flower or possibly a sun, a vibrant explosion of color on a crumpled piece of paper. "For me?" Ethan asked, taking the paper with appropriate reverence, treating it as if it were a priceless masterpiece. Lily nodded solemnly, her eyes wide and serious, then climbed onto the chair beside him, apparently deciding he was trustworthy, an acceptance that bypassed his carefully constructed defenses. She leaned against his arm, sticky fingers and all, and went back to her coloring, her presence a quiet, comforting weight. Sophie's eyes went wide, her expression a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "Lily doesn't usually warm up to strangers," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "She must really like you." Ethan looked down at the small person leaning against him with such casual trust, her small body radiating warmth, and felt something shift inside his chest, a tectonic plate shifting beneath the surface of his hardened heart. This was what he had been missing in his carefully curated life, the element that had eluded him in his relentless pursuit of success. Authenticity, connection, the simple joy of being with someone who asked nothing of him except his presence, his undivided attention. "I really like her too," Ethan said, meeting Sophie's eyes across the table, his gaze sincere, unwavering. The moment stretched between them, suspended in the air, pregnant with possibility and fear and hope, a silent acknowledgement of the connection that had blossomed in the most unexpected of circumstances. Then Lily yawned hugely, her small body slumping against him, and Sophie glanced at her phone with obvious reluctance, her practical nature reasserting itself. "I should get her home for her nap," Sophie said, starting to gather crayons and papers, her movements efficient and practiced. "Thank you for being so gracious about this disaster of a first date." "This was the best first date I've had in years," Ethan said, and he meant it, the words resonating with the truth he had discovered within himself. "Can I see you again?" Sophie paused, her hands hovering over the scattered crayons, searching his face for sincerity, for a genuine connection that transcended the superficiality of his world. "Ethan, I need you to understand something," she said, her voice serious, her gaze unflinching. "I come as a package deal. I don't have money for fancy restaurants or designer clothes. My life revolves around nap schedules and library story hours. I'm not the glamorous type of woman someone like you usually dates." "Someone like me is tired of glamorous," Ethan said, his voice firm, his conviction absolute. "Someone like me just spent an hour talking to a woman who made him remember why life is worth living, who showed him the beauty in simplicity and the power of unconditional love. Someone like me would very much like to have dinner with you again, maybe at your place, so Lily can be comfortable. If you would trust me enough to allow that." Tears shimmered in Sophie's eyes, threatening to spill over, betraying the depth of her emotions. "You would come to my tiny apartment and eat whatever I could afford to cook?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, a question born of disbelief. "I would be honored," Ethan said simply, his sincerity radiating from him, a beacon of hope in the dimly lit landscape of her life. Sophie wrote her address on a napkin with a crayon, her hand shaking slightly, the physical manifestation of her vulnerability. "Friday night?" she asked, her voice laced with anticipation. 6 o'clock. I can't promise anything fancy." "Friday at 6 is perfect," Ethan confirmed, his heart swelling with a joy he had not felt in years. As Sophie gathered Lily in her bag, preparing to leave, the little girl reached out and touched Ethan's face with one small hand, her fingers soft against his skin. "Bye-bye," she said clearly, her voice a sweet melody. "Goodbye, Lily," Ethan replied, his voice rough with unexpected emotion, a tenderness he had not known he possessed. He watched them leave, Sophie in her modest blue dress carrying her daughter, their figures silhouetted against the chrome and copper elegance of the cafe, a stark contrast that highlighted their authenticity. They looked out of place among the trendy crowd, the perfectly coiffed and impeccably dressed, but to Ethan, they looked like the only real thing in the room, the only source of genuine light. That Friday, Ethan climbed 3 flights of stairs, his breath catching in his chest, to a tiny apartment in a building that had seen better days, a stark departure from the gleaming skyscrapers he usually frequented. Sophie answered the door, her face framed by a stray strand of hair, a smudge of flour on her cheek, and worry etched in her eyes. "I made spaghetti," she said, her voice apologetic. "It's all I could afford this week. I'm sorry it's not more." "It smells wonderful," Ethan said truthfully, stepping into the small space that Sophie had transformed into a home with second-hand furniture and handmade touches, a testament to her resourcefulness and creativity. Lily ran to him immediately, her energy boundless, showing him every toy she owned in rapid succession, her excitement contagious. They ate dinner at a table barely big enough for three, a cozy gathering in the heart of their small world, and it was the best meal Ethan had eaten in years, not because of the food itself, but because of the company, the laughter, the genuine connection that flowed between them. After dinner, he helped wash dishes, the mundane task transformed into a shared experience, while Sophie put Lily to bed, singing her a lullaby in a soft, soothing voice. They talked quietly in the small living room, the silence punctuated by the gentle hum of the city outside, about dreams and fears, about the courage it took to be vulnerable, to open themselves up to the possibility of love and heartbreak. When Ethan finally left, well past midnight, he stood in the hallway for a long moment before descending the stairs, his mind reeling, his heart full. He had walked into that cafe expecting nothing, and had walked out with something precious, something invaluable, the beginning of understanding what had been missing from his life, the realization that true wealth lay not in possessions, but in connection. Over the following months, Ethan became a regular fixture in Sophie and Lily's life, seamlessly integrating himself into their routine, embracing the simple joys they offered. He traded business dinners for story time at the library, board meetings for park visits, networking events for quiet evenings in their tiny apartment, content to be present, to be a part of their world. His colleagues were baffled, struggling to comprehend his transformation, his sudden shift in priorities. His friends thought he had lost his mind, abandoning the trappings of his success for a life they deemed ordinary. But Ethan had never been happier, his soul nourished by the love and connection he had found in Sophie and Lily. He still ran his empire, still closed deals, and built buildings, but now he did it with a purpose beyond profit, driven by a desire to create positive change in the world, to give back to the community that had supported him. He created a scholarship fund for single parents, providing them with the resources they needed to pursue their education and achieve their dreams. He renovated affordable housing, creating safe and comfortable homes for families in need. He invested in community libraries, ensuring that everyone had access to the power of knowledge and the joy of reading. Sophie had reminded him that success was not measured in square footage or stock prices, but in the lives you touched and the love you shared, in the positive impact you had on the world around you. And Lily, who had offered him a crayon drawing on their first meeting, a simple gesture of acceptance and trust, taught him that the best things in life come with sticky fingers and unconditional love, that the greatest treasures are often found in the most unexpected places. A year later, when Ethan proposed to Sophie in their favorite corner of the library, surrounded by the comforting scent of old books and the gentle murmur of readers, where Rachel still read to children every Saturday, her voice filled with warmth and enthusiasm, he did not offer her diamonds or mansions, the symbols of his wealth and status. He offered her his heart, which she had stolen the moment she walked into that cafe, her eyes filled with honesty, her arms cradling a toddler, a symbol of her strength and resilience. "You already have everything," Sophie said through happy tears, her voice choked with emotion. "Why would you want my complicated life, my messy world filled with challenges and uncertainties? Because you showed me that everything I had was nothing without someone to share it with," Ethan replied, his voice filled with love and gratitude. "You and Lily didn't steal my heart. You saved it. You showed me what it means to truly live, to truly love, to find joy in the simplest of moments." Sometimes the people who change our lives arrive when we least expect them, in forms we never imagined, bearing gifts we did not know we needed, their presence a catalyst for transformation. And sometimes the greatest fortune we can find is not in what we have, but in who we become when we open our hearts to love, when we embrace the unexpected and allow ourselves to be transformed by the power of connection. If this story touched you, if it resonated with your own experiences of unexpected love and second chances, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of courage, resilience, and the transformative power of human connection. Leave a comment telling us about a time when someone surprised you by seeing beyond the surface to the person you really are. when someone offered you a chance you never thought you deserved, or when taking a chance on love changed everything, rewriting the story of your life. Your story, your experiences, could be exactly what someone else needs to hear today, a beacon of hope in their own journey towards love and fulfillment.